Okay, so this is the last lecture, number, I believe it's the fourth one in this chapter, and we're really only about one topic here, and that is what are some of the characteristics of the newborn. So, like, what kind of things can you expect, or yeah, what are the characteristics of this brand new person? One is that they sleep a lot, right? If you do the math here, it suggests that I'm in the wrong place. They suggest that babies are only awake about 8 hours a day. The rest of the time they sleep. And they sort of, and what they advise new moms to do is when the baby's asleep, they should sleep too, because this is an exhausting time. I remember when the second one came thinking that I didn't need to sleep every time the baby was, and that I would be lightheaded and dizzy, whatever. Baby sleeps a lot, mom should be sleeping a lot too. Babies are born with with a handful of different reflexes, some of them of which will go away as they get a little bit older, but a couple are really important for for feeding, and that is what they call the sucking and the rooting reflex. The rooting reflex is kind of interesting if you've ever spent time around a baby. It's that if you rub up against their cheek, they'll turn, and the idea is that both of these enable the baby to find food. And then the fact that if you put something in their mouth, they will suck. That's that they're born with this reflex to do these things. A couple that will fade and then eventually come back in a different kind of version is grasping, that if you put something in a baby's hand, they'll do this number, they'll try to grab onto it. Eventually, this one will go away. And the stepping, so if you hold a baby up, and we're talking brand new newborns, they're going to kind of do this little thing with their feet. And matter of fact, the presence of these reflexes, or the presence or the absence of them, predicts cognitive or developmental health. That if a baby doesn't have these, it's an indication that something is not as it should be. Then we can talk a little bit about their senses, and these could show up on quizzes because this would be really good quiz material, like which of their four senses is most keenly developed and which one is the least keenly developed. Well, the least keenly is vision. Least developed is their vision. And your textbook says or illustrates, makes the point that there would be no opportunity for a baby's sense of vision to develop because the womb is very dark. There's really nothing for them to look at. So their ability to see is really only about 8 to 16 inches. Their visual acuity, I think it says, is like 40. Well, anyway, there's something on the order of 40 feet would be seen as like 200. I forget. That's not my expertise. But the point is that babies can't see very well, and they see things very close up. They're very what do we call that? Distance, nearsighted is the word. Their sense of hearing, though, is very well developed, and this does kind of make sense because while sounds may be muffled, they still can hear lots of things in the womb. Your book discusses, and I think this is kind of cool. You read about this in a lot of other parenting literature, that the sounds that babies are most interested in hearing is the voice of their mother. Well, this would have makes sense because they've heard the voice of their mother for a very, very, their whole life. That's the voice that they hear the most. In some of the laboratory research, they've demonstrated that babies prefer to hear recordings of their mother reading books as opposed to other people reading books that they've just grown. And this always makes me think of a memory I have of being a child, and I can still remember laying on my mother's chest with my head up against her, and I just loved the sound of my mother's voice. It was just very comforting, and that's sort of what I think you see with this one, is that babies, this is a very comforting sound. So they prefer the sound of their mother's voice. Also, something called infant-directed speech that is not highlighted in your textbook. It's mentioned, but it's not like highlighted. And an infant-directed speech is a kind of speech that is very slow and high-pitched, like the way you would talk to a baby. Isn't that cute? Right? That's infant-directed speech. And apparently it has been research has suggested that this is how babies act, literally, like they prefer this way of speaking, and it's almost as if humans are like, they're almost compulsory. This is how they talk to babies. So there's an evolutionary theory that the reason we always talk to babies like that is because that's how they're programmed, and it's like we're mutually in sync with one another. Another discussion here is the sensitivity to pain and touch, and The book says that babies have very in tune to the sense of touch, and the notion, and this is sort of the evidence of this is by increased blood pressure, the elevated stress hormones, decreased oxygen in the blood, which are physiological markers of stress. And so researchers conclude that this is an indication that babies can feel pain. Of course, I don't know why we wouldn't think they could feel pain. And then taste and smell. Smell is highly developed. Taste, babies prefer sweet. The laboratory research uses similar cues. What do babies prefer? They prefer the lab suggests that they prefer the smell of their mothers compared to other women. The research uses breast pads, so these are the things that women put over their breasts so that they don't leak, but that babies have a preference to the smell of their mother's breast milk as opposed to others' breast milk. And preferences for sweet things, which would kind of make sense. Other animals prefer sweet things too. Okay, so this wraps up this chapter. In this chapter, we have discussed, let's see here, we've discussed preparing for childbirth for both baby and mother, some of the options to consider, medical place, involvement, these kinds of things. The different stages of childbirth. Know that the baby passes through the birth canal during the second stage. The role of oxytocin, some of the other sort of medical interventions, things can go wrong, oxygen, low birth weight, what it means to be small for date, the relative head proportion, body shape. These terms right here, the ones that are bolded, could show up on a quiz. Those are good examples. And then finally, what are some of the sensory and behavioral characteristics of the baby? Okay, this is the end of the chapter.